Hey everyone, Dave Cordero here. I'm recording this video just to do a little recap of the Grand Prix which happened this last weekend. I already made a video about my deck list, so this one's going to mostly run through each match that I played, how each of them went, how I sideboarded, and if I remember anything notable from the match. I might not remember every single detail of every single game just because it was a long weekend, but I figured may as well get as much of this information out of there as possible. Starting right here, we have a graph which shows the breakdown of the day 2 metagame. Given that most of the people were playing Hogak, Humans, some kind of Phoenix deck, Burn, it seemed like a pretty good option to play MartyrProc. My current deck list is also pretty good against blue-white control, has a reasonable Jund matchup. The only things in here that I'm really kind of worried about are most Tron, yeah. Some of the Whir combo decks can be kind of annoying. The ones that are more on Sword, less so. The ones that are Prison are definitely more difficult. Here we have black-white mid-range, which is actually what they had my deck listed as, so that's kind of cool. But yeah, if you can see, most of the stuff up here is pretty good as far as matchups go. What I ended up playing against was mostly aggro decks and a couple of mid-range decks and one control deck. First round I played was against Jund. That one was super grindy. We ended up going into game 3 with 4 minutes left on the clock, and I was able to win game 3 on turn 3 of turns. So you can close games out pretty quickly with this deck list. The way I ended up sideboarding was I took out the Wheel of Sun and Moon, the Settle the Wreckage, and the Kami of False Hope, because Kami of False Hope is pretty low impact. Wheel of Sun and Moon is mostly a hate piece for Hogak, and with all of the discard spells that are in Jund decks, they're going to be able to see this and play around it more effectively, and I want something that can kill Dark Confidant. What I ended up bringing in was Winds of Abandon, which is a much better answer for Dark Confidant. It also can overload, so you can get 2 for 1 there. Since it is a War of Attrition there, you want to get as many 2 for 1s as you can. On that note, I also brought in Elspeth Knight Errant because she can grind a bit better, help pressure the Planeswalkers by jumping something over their blockers, making 1/1s to sack to Liliana, whatever it may be. And then, speaking of Planeswalkers, Hex Parasite. Hex Parasite's pretty good at mowing down walkers, especially if you bring it back into play with like an Orzhov Charm during the end step, use the rest of your mana to take out a walker, untap, take out another walker. You can really kind of get out of control with that. It does die to a lot of their walkers, so with the first time you play it, maybe you'll only be able to like take out one of their walkers, and if they have another one, it'll just like die to the Liliana down tick or the other Liliana up tick or Renin 6 down tick. But it is still a useful thing to have in the toolbox. You just have to make sure you play it at the correct time and uh, get to get some positive value on it. The second match I played of the day was Mono Red Phoenix. That one was against one of my friends from a local game store here in Austin. Uh, Mono Red Phoenix is just a burn deck. It's a faster burn deck, but at the end of the day, gaining life with Martyr of the Sands, getting active Sarah's Ascendance, these are all things that burn decks are going to struggle against. You just go with a classic MartyrProc game plan, and they're going to have a lot of trouble beating you. The most interesting thing that happened during our match was a judge call we ended up having to make where Finale of Promise, or whatever the red finale is called, it was cast for 1, targeting Faithless Looting and Lightning Bolt. The Lightning Bolt didn't get a target declared, and then my friend drew 2 cards from the Faithless Looting, so I was like, wait, hold up, what's the Lightning Bolt targeting? But the 2 cards had already been drawn, so as such, more information was gained. So we just called the judge over to figure out how to resolve this situation. The way it was ruled was that the Lightning Bolt was cast but had no target, so it triggered prowess and like Phoenixes and such, but it had no target. We didn't think that made too much sense, so we appealed it to the head judge, and the head judge agreed with that assessment. And the reasoning was for that was just in case somebody were trying to get rid of some of the cards in their hand by like shuffling them back or whatever, they might be able to try to implore a cheat like that and then call it so that that way they could get it remedied in a certain way. So the judges decided that this was a better way to resolve it without allowing people to try to exploit a judge call to cheat. So that was kind of interesting. If you play Finale of Promise, just make sure you make your targets. The way I sideboarded there was the two combos because they are a prowess deck. Get to really punish them for doing that. And Winds of Abandon. I brought out Wheel of Sun and Moon, Cleansing Nova, and one Anguished Unmaking. The reason I cut Wheel of Sun and Moon, even though they are a somewhat graveyard reliant deck, is that this is ultimately a Hogak hate piece at the end of the day. It's useful in some other matchups as well, like the Urza Sword decks, but I can beat the mono red deck in a fair fight, and I don't really need something narrow like this to do it, and I would rather have something high impact like a combo or just a removal spell for their Phoenix that exiles it, so don't even have to worry about it coming back or whatever. Similarly, I did cut the Cleansing Nova because by the time you get to that point in the game, a lot of their threats are recursive. It's not exactly necessary to have there, so that's what I went with. Next round was against humans. Against humans, just, classic MartyrProc game plan again. Gain a bunch of life, recur your life gain and threats, get some 6/6s out there. Pretty straightforward matchup. Nothing too special happened. I brought out the Wheel of Sun and Moon, and I brought in Winds of Abandon. You don't really have to touch the main deck too much to beat humans. I like Anguish Unmaking just because sometimes they have some weird threats. It's also nice to have, what is this, 1, 2, 3, 4 different spot removal names, so Meddling Mage is a little less effective. On the same side, I have 1, 2, 3 different sweepers. My opponent, I believe game 2, actually, remembered an interesting detail, had, I believe, 4 or 5 Meddling Mages out, and they had Path named, they had Anguished Unmaking named, they had Wrath of God named, and they had Martyr of Sands named because I had a bunch of stuff in my hand that they had seen previously or whatever. I was stuck on 5 lands for a long time. Eventually, I hit the 6th land, and then I overloaded a Winds of Abandon, which they weren't really expecting, and that got them pretty good. It was kind of nice that they didn't know which sweepers I had. You have so many options in white. It was just kind of hard for them to do that. Another point in a different game versus one of my humans opponents, I believe it was the first one, they played a Meddling Mage on Squadron Hawk, which was kind of funny because, as you guys know, I am not playing Squadron Hawk. So that felt kind of nice. Next round. Ah, yes, black-green mid-range. I sideboarded the same way I did for Jund. The difference here is that during game 3, I made a pretty egregious play mistake, and ultimately it cost me the game. The situation was my opponent was at, I believe, 6 or 7 life, and I was at 2. They had a giant Tarmogoyf in play, and I had the read on them that they had a removal spell in hand. In play, I had a Ranger Captain of Eos, a Ranger of Eos, and a Martyr of Sands. My plan was, because they had already swung with the Tarmogoyf, to attack them with one of the creatures as to, not leave myself dead to them top decking another removal spell. Because if I swing in there, I die when they have a removal spell because they just kill one of my creatures and then swing back with the Tarmogoyf and I lose. If I leave just one back, same story. They just, take the damage. Yeah, they were at 7 life. They take the damage and kill my left blocker, swing in for lethal. So I swung in with one of the Rangers. They top deck a Liliana. They play it. They down tick it. And I think I was just tired from it being the middle of the day, and I made a mistake. Um, I sacrificed one of my untapped creatures instead of the tapped Ranger, and then they removed my other creature and swung in for lethal. So that was kind of sad. I did look at the top card of my deck, which was Winds of Abandon. So I was like, ah, darn, if you know, just got to be careful about making mistakes like that. And it's, I mean, that's part of the game, right? You make mistakes, and then you don't win, right? So that's ideally that's how Magic should work. If you make fewer mistakes than your opponent, you should win. So I don't feel too bad about that. I didn't let it tilt me, and I came back and beat my next opponent, who was on a mono red Phoenix. Mono red Phoenix. Again, great matchup, sideboarded the same way. This guy's deck was a bit spicier though. They were playing Niv Magus Elemental and Grape Shot, and then the other red storm card that makes it so things can't block. They still had all of the same Phoenix stuff. I'm not sure what cards they weren't playing. Probably like Lava Dart or some of those other stranger cards. Uh, Game one, I didn't see any of that. We both mulled to 5. The game kind of went a little bit later, and I ended up winning that. I think when both decks mull to 5, it kind of favors us a little bit just because we're trying to not die on turn 2 or 3 to the mono red deck. And if we don't, then we probably win. Game 2 is when they made a huge Niv Magus Elemental, tried to swing at me. Luckily, I had, you know, a land in play and a Path to Exile in hand, so I was able to Path to Exile their Niv Magus Elemental, and that was pretty much the game. Next round was Hogak. Hogak, this was the first one of the day. We had an interesting judge call. I'm not convinced my opponent was intentionally trying to cheat, but there was a situation that came up that was raising a lot of red flags. So I made sure I called the judge over and we got it straightened away and handled. My opponent was very, very nice to me through the whole thing. I think it was just getting towards the end of the day. They made an honest mistake, but there were just a couple of things that uh, were a little confusing. So that's why you call judges over. Don't necessarily give your opponent the benefit of the doubt, especially later in the day at a GP when you're both trying to make day two. Just they could be very nice, and that's fine. It could be a mistake. If it's just a mistake, they'll get a warning and move on. If it's a habitual thing, the judges will be able to pick up on that. So what happened was I had previously been able to exile 2 of their bridges from below by sacrificing a Martyr of Sands. One of the reasons I think that this deck is well positioned against Hogak is, one, having 9 main deck creatures that can exile a bridge from below on demand, having a ton of exile based removal and sweepers, and the ability to sideboard cards like Rest in Peace or Wheel of Sun and Moon, whatever it may be. So my opponent has 2 bridges left to try to combo off and mill me. They're milling themselves. They get to 10 cards left in their deck. They have 1 bridge in their graveyard, and they're trying to find the other bridge, or so I assume. They milled themselves for 8 with Hogak, and so what they did was they took 7 cards, one at a time, put them into their graveyard, and kind of like, it was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then there was a notable pause of at least 2 or 3 seconds, and then they drew a card from their deck, like the 8th card that was supposed to be milled, they picked up and put into their hand. At which point I was like, hold up, what just happened? We got to call a judge. So, one thing that might have been happening was possibly Bridge from Below was in their hand and they were trying to get it into their graveyard, or possibly a mistake, like I said earlier. But I did call a judge over. It was like a 13-minute judge call, going through, getting both sides of the story, seeing what's happened. The judges ruled that, well, they said that they don't believe that my opponent was trying to cheat based on the information provided, and that uh, I was going to look at their hand, pick one of the cards from their hand, and put that into their discard pile because it should have been milled. So it was a hidden card error, drawing extra card. I can't remember the exact name of the error. But I looked at their hand. They had a Hogak, a Bridge from Below, and a Bloodstained Mire. And according to my opponent, they had drew the Bloodstained Mire. The guy next to him backed that up. So they're, that is what it is. So I just took the Bloodstained Mire, put it into the graveyard because that was the best option for me, regardless of whether or not that was true. And because the bridge was in their hand, they couldn't combo off. I was at 24 life. They couldn't kill me with just one card left in their deck. With they only get one attack step, and I for sure had answers at that point. So that was game one. Game two, I did some similar stuff with martyrs exiling their bridges. I had two rest in pieces in my hand, and I didn't even bother casting them. Like I didn't need to. They didn't have anything relevant in their graveyard for me to get, and I was worried about just like running one out there and having it get nature's claimed. I did eventually run one out there after they hard cast a bridge from below, and then nature's claimed it. So I'm like, okay, that's one of their answers. Now I can run out a rest in peace. So I ran it out, and they had another one for it anyway, but it didn't matter. I was at like 50 something life, and they died shortly after without any ways to mill me out. So that was Hogak. Next round was Jund versus Jund. I think we had a pretty close game one. They ended up taking that. Game two, I mulliganed to 6 on the play. Looked at my hand. It wasn't that good, but if you mulligan to 5 on the play against Jund, you're not going to win very often. So I kept it. Got stuck on 2 lands and then died several turns later. So, I mean, that happens. I think the Black Green X matchups are about 50-50. I went against it 3 times this weekend and ended up 1 and 2 versus it with a pretty big misplay in one of them. So it seems about par for the course. Next round was Hogak again. This is after the cut to day 2. So uh, my 7-2, or sorry, I'm 6-2 going into this round. This Hogak player shaved the mill combo in the post board games. Oh yeah, I should say how I sideboarded for Hogak. It should seem pretty obvious that the 4 rest in pieces come in. Card is really good against them. The other card I bring in is Winds of Abandon. What I bring out is Cleansing Nova because I don't like destroy-based sweepers against them. It's also a little bit slow. I also bring out the Proclamation of Rebirth because I have 4 rest in pieces coming in, and Proclamation doesn't really do anything if you have a rest in piece out. Then I brought out 3 Orzhov Charms, which I'm not 100% sure about being the right cut, but that's what I was trying for this weekend. The reason I cut that is because I'm trying to have rest in peace out, so the reanimation thing isn't going to work too much. The destroy effect on it isn't as great. Like, if you destroy a Hogak with this, like, what did you really accomplish besides just taking 8 and letting them cast it again? So I was like, all right, I'll just shave on a little bit of removal. Really, my goal here is to exile their bridges and then sweep the board. And that generally works. My opponent in this round, as I mentioned, shaved the combo. They recognized the power of all of my self-sacrificing guys, and they didn't even want to bother with the bridges and the altar plan, so they just wanted to go with a straight, like, try to beat me down. I can see the logic behind that, but I also am highly skeptical that if you're going against MartyrProc and your goal is to, yeah, maybe just beat them down harder, it seems a little sketchy to me. But I ended up winning that one, so maybe it would work some other time. Next round was the first round of day 2. Well, the last round was after the cut to day 2 because they do the first round of day 2 on day 1. Round 10 was the next morning, is what I'm trying to say. It was against humans. My humans opponent was like, okay, yep, seems like a pretty bad matchup. It played out pretty much the same way humans usually does, bringing out the wheel, bringing in the Winds of Abandon. I don't think there were any interesting meddling mage names there. So moving on, go against Hogak again. Hogak seems like a pretty good matchup at this point. I'm winning them pretty easily. This guy had a main deck Leyline of the Void, which I ended up getting rid of with Anguished Unmaking, so that way I could use the Martyrs. That was kind of he had a couple different things I could get with the Anguish, but the main deck Leyline I decided to go with. He didn't have it in his opening hand. He cast it on turn 5 or something like that, so that kind of caught me off guard a little bit. Oh, and he also had Thoughtseize in the board, or one of them had Thoughtseize. There's all sorts of different stuff going on in the sideboards of the Hogak decks. Like you're not really sure if you gotta play around like Fatal Push, Thoughtseize, or whatever it is. After that was against humans. This one is another one of my friends that I ended up going against. We uh, and that one, game one was pretty close. Game two, which I lost. Game two, I won pretty decidedly. And game three, we're going back and forth. There was a period of about like 6 turns where if I drew any removal spell, I'd be able to get rid of the Kite Self Rebooter that had a Winds of Abandon underneath it, and then wipe their whole board and easily win from there. But I didn't end up drawing any removal spells over the course of like it was like 6 turns or so, and eventually died to the beatdown. So that kind of sucks, but it happens. It's variance. You can't win them all, and it is pretty late in the day on at a GP, so everyone is really good players, especially the guy who's going against that round. Next round, Mono Red Phoenix. Get to that one actually he conceded really quick. Like he just was like, oh yeah, this is not gonna happen. I think he won the die roll, went turn one, Mountain pass, and then I just kind of gave a chuckle. He's like, oh, is this the mirror match? And then I just went Emeria pass, and he's like, oh no. He knew it was gonna happen. I played a Martyr of Sands on turn two, gained a bunch of life. I think I tutored up on turn four, 2 more Martyrs, and then he conceded because he's like, all right, I've seen enough. Game two, I played a Martyr on turn two again. This time he surgical extractioned it. Turn three, I played a combo, passed to them. They had a prowess creature or two in play. They went, yeah, it's just one prowess creature. They went Manamorphose. I said trigger. They went Manamorphose. I said trigger, and then they just decided to concede at that point because they were like, all right, there's no way I'm beating this combo that was out. And I had a second combo in my hand, which they didn't know about because I drew it after they had not Inquisitioned, Surgical Extraction. And so they were just like, this is not worth my mental energy. So that one was pretty easy. Next one was versus Hogak. Game one, I mulliganed to 5. It was still pretty close, honestly. I definitely was in it until the very end. Game two, I might have been able to win game two if I had been aware that my opponent didn't know what I had in play. I had a Martyr of Sands and a Serra Ascendant. They thought the Serra Ascendant was a Kami of False Hope, so they were playing around that. I had exiled 2 of their bridges with a Martyr of Sands earlier, and they had one in their yard, and they started to kind of like half combo off, and I didn't think it would be enough to actually mill me out. And then I did some math, and I was like, okay, it would be. So I sacked the Martyr, but it was kind of a little too late at that point. And they thought the Serra Ascendant was the reason they weren't milling themselves to get to the second bridge was because they thought that this was a second sack effect, and that I would be able to exile both of their bridges. Uh, but if I had known that they were afraid that this was a sack effect, I would have definitely just gotten rid of one of the bridges earlier with the Martyr. I think maybe only one bridge was exiled yeah, because if it was 2 bridges, then it would have been a no-brainer to exile the one. I think I was worried about them being able to just like mill themselves out and then get to a second bridge. Uh, but yeah, I ended up losing that one. Next one was against blue-white control. That one played out uh, interestingly. See, I wasn't sure about the blue-white control matchup until I believe Voice of Defiance from the Discord server messaged me to let me know that they were 4-0 in a league and had beaten blue-white control 4 times. Every single round in this league, they went against blue-white control, and they went 2-0 every single time, crediting the Castigates with how they were able to do so. So I go into this game, found out they're playing blue-white control, and I'm kind of excited to see how it plays out myself. The way it ended up working was I got a Serra Ascendant out pretty quickly, started beating down with it as a 6/6. On turn 3, I played Ranger Captain of Eos, tutored up a second Serra Ascendant, passed to them. During their upkeep, I sacked the Ranger Captain of Eos because I was kind of worried about them having a sweeper. or like a planeswalker to deal with my Serra Ascendant. Instead, they actually had nothing, and they had to go to discard because they couldn't play any of their spells. They just missed their land drop. Everything they had was a spell. So that was kind of nice, and I felt like I was winning it at that point. I I believe I won that one like a turn or two later. I think I like played a Sorin and got back the. No, I didn't play Sorin. They didn't see the Sorin yet. Yeah, so I think I played a second Ranger Captain for my hand, and that was enough for them. Game two, I guess I'll start with how I sideboarded. I brought out the Cleansing Nova, Saddle the Wreckage, Wheel. I brought out Winds of Abandon, Kami of False Hope, and two Path to Exiles. And then I brought in, let's see, move all this stuff over here. I brought in 8 card. Yeah, these are the 8 cards I brought in. 4 Castigate, 2 Combo, Hex Parasite, and Elspeth. I didn't end up drawing any of the Castigates until we were in top deck mode. So that was kind of weird. Combo, I did draw one of those, and they pretty much had to kill it immediately because this thing's a beast. The thing that did the most work for me was this Elspeth. I believe I made like 5 tokens with it. They were trying to, with their like other tokens, like pressure it so that I couldn't ult it because that would be pretty much game over for them. But it let me jump some things to kill some of their planeswalkers, make a bunch of soldiers, and Hex Parasite did manage to take out a Jace the Mind Sculptor eventually. I think I had played it at one point because they dealt with all my threats and I just needed something to like put a little bit of pressure out there. They killed it, and then at some point later I got it back with Sorin and had enough mana up to immediately eat a Jace, so that was cool. My opponent thought that the Sorins were cute, is I believe what they called it, but I don't know. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. But anyways, I ended up winning that one when my opponent had 9 cards left in their deck, so they were pretty much out of answers, and we just kind of had a bunch of stuff going on. The Elspeth got us there, along with all of the value engines with Sorin and Rangers and all of that. They surgical extracted my Orzhov Charm at one point in the game. The reason that they did that over something like one of the Serra Ascendants that was in my graveyard was that I had 3 unknown cards in my hand, which at the time I believe was 2 Field of Ruins and another card that I don't recall. But they were trying to kill my Elspeth, which was at 5. They had a 1/1 and one of the monk tokens that has prowess from Monastery Mentor that I had anguished on making like immediately. They had cast 3 spells earlier in the turn. It was like Narset, Opt, and then they wanted to get another prowess trigger to kill the Elspeth, but they wouldn't be able to kill the Elspeth if I had an Orzhov Charm in my hand. And if they targeted Serra Ascendant with that, then I would be able to just Orzhov Charm it back into play and have a blocker. So they just went with the safer option and went with the Orzhov Charm, I guess. I mean, I guess I could still respond with that and hit the Serra Ascendant, but at least if they hit the Orzhov Charm, then they're not getting blown out quite as much because they can get rid of the rest of my Orzhov Charms and just not worry about it for the rest of the game. So I think that that's what they were thinking about that, but I didn't have Orzhov Charm in my hands. Elspeth did die, but that ultimately didn't matter because she had gained me a huge advantage before that. If I were going to make any changes to this deck going forward, I'm pretty sure what I would end up doing is, as much as it's kind of ridiculous to say, the Proclamation of Rebirth isn't super necessary with this build. Sorin does everything Proc does, except it does other things as well, so when there's a lot of graveyard hate, it's still useful given your creature's lifelink, being able to pressure planeswalkers or applying a little bit of pressure to players. If there's no graveyard hate in play, it is just amazing because it can hit the Ranger Captain of Eos immediately. If you've ticked it up, it can hit Ranger of Eos. Being able to hit your non-1 drops is huge. In the spot, I would maybe try out the Elspeth Knight Errant or some other kind of flex spot. Maybe this Winds of Abandon could come in. I brought in Winds of Abandon a lot. It might just free up a sideboard slot. Or some people in the Discord were talking about Athreos. I'm not 100% convinced Athreos is good. It's better in this than it was the last time I tried it, but I don't know. I'm thinking Planeswalkers. It just feels so good to go like Ranger Captain of Eos Sorin. I imagine Ranger of Captain Eos Elspeth would also be just really strong. So maybe another removal spell, maybe a Planeswalker is what I'm going to try. I think next week I'm going to end up changing it up a little bit and running it through a league. I'm going to run this one as is through a league and record a video with it, so stay tuned.